Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight, we are going to be continuing our series, The Seven Under the Shade of Allah. Tonight's topic is going to be two people who love one another for the sake of Allah. Our speaker is going to be Brother Sanjay. Brother Sanjay became Muslim in 2017 and is pursuing a bachelor's degree in Islamic Studies at Mishka University. He's also studying in the Tashil wa Taqreeb certificate program at Sydney Islamic Institute. He has spoken and worked with various organizations, including Yaqeen Institute, ICNA, and MAS. Most recently, he founded an organization named Relay with a mission of supporting new and born Muslims on their faith journey. Brother Sanjay also has a bachelor's degree in computer science and works in the IT field. Make sure to follow Relay on Instagram for amazing, beneficial content. Before we get started, I just have a couple announcements. Tomorrow, inshallah, is going to be the Al-Maghrib class talking about the promise of Allah with Sheikh Amr al-Shukri and Sheikh Suleiman Hani. Tickets are 40% off, so get them before they run out. This is going to be a super informative class. It's going to be from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., so inshallah, invite everybody here to join us. We're going to be having your brothers halakha and sports night every Sunday. I plan on bringing inshallah many brothers for that as well. So it's going to be fun. We're going to play basketball. It's a nice halakha afterwards to join us. And we have brothers jiu-jitsu every Friday and Saturday. We're going to be having a sisters halakha every Friday at 6 p.m. And inshallah, I'll give the mic to Brother Sanjay.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashraf al-anbiya wal mursalin wa ala ahlihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Once again, Jazakallah khair for the introduction. Jazakallah khair for having me. And I think this hadith that we're going to talk about today, or the portion of the hadith, is very, very profound. Very, very just amazing when you think about it. Before we get into the portion of the hadith though, just this idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is shading seven categories of people on the Day of Judgment is just a proof of His mercy, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy is all encompassing. And the fact that He chooses to shade us shows, just even on the day where we're supposed to be put through everything we did in life has to be put to account. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is still all merciful for us. It also shows us that we're not meant to have a transactional relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It's our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should manifest itself in our interactions with people, which we'll go into today, about loving each other for the sake of Allah, our interaction with society, with the environment that we're in, the way we interact with ourselves. And so, and the third point that's kind of general before we actually get into the topic is when we love Allah, when we love the Prophet ﷺ, it is our key to success in this life and the hereafter. And we're going to expand on that, inshallah. So I want to paint the picture because to me, it's easy to say, of the seven shaded on the Day of Judgment is the people who love each other for the sake of Allah. It's easy to say that. But I want to actually paint the picture of what you're looking at on the Day of Judgment, right? On the Day of Judgment, you're looking at the angels. I think it's 70,000 angels that are bringing the hellfire. They're bringing the hellfire with them, 70,000 rains, and on every single rain, there's 70,000 angels. Quick math, 70,000 times 70,000, I think is, I'm going to sound really dumb if I don't get this right, 4,900,000,000 angels. Right? I added extra zero. 4,900,000,000 angels. So just think about 900 million angels. Just think about that. 4,900,000,000 angels are carrying hellfire. And you're seeing this happen on the Day of Judgment. Not to mention, we know that on the Day of Judgment, we're in our most vulnerable state. Meaning what? Meaning that we are barefooted, we're naked, and we're literally just in the state of shock, in the state of fear, in the state of I'm only considerate with myself. I'm only thinking about myself. And you see hellfire being brought to you, right? And the reason why I'm trying to paint this picture is I read a quote of Abdullah ibn Mubarak, who's one of the great people of the past, pious people of the past. And he's talking to someone named Sahil ibn Ali. And they're both very pious people. And he catches Sahil ibn Ali in a state of just contemplation. He notices he's just drifting off and thinking. So Abdullah ibn Mubarak, he asks him, he says, what has you in this state? He says, I'm thinking of myself on the bridge over the fire on the Day of Judgment. And subhanAllah, that just shows like even the great people of the past would like just lose themselves in this. So like we mentioned, you see the angels bringing the hellfire. 4,900,000,000 angels are bringing the hellfire. And everyone is barefooted. Everyone's in a state of fear. Everyone is shocked on the Day of Judgment. Everyone's going to the different prophets of the past. They're going to each prophet and they're saying, intercede on our behalf. And they're saying, I can't help you. Go to the next, go to the next. And so everyone is just kind of alarmed and shocked and scared. And everyone's concerned with themselves. And so this is the picture that's being painted here. The last thing I'll say about the Day of Judgment in terms of its visuals is the sun is brought close to the earth. The sun is brought close to the earth. You know how the weather gets in New York in the summertime? It's 80 degrees, 90 degrees. We feel like we're melting. Well, we'd literally be melting when the sun is brought close to the earth, right? And there's literally no comfort in that. Everyone's going to be melting and burning from the heat, the scorching heat. And the only shade, and this is where we kind of get into the hadith here, the only shade on that day is the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The only shade on that day is the shade that Allah provides for His believers under those 7 categories that this halaqah is based on. And today, inshallah, we're going to talk about those who love each other for the sake of Allah. Just think about that. Loving someone else for the sake of Allah will give you comfort, will give you relief, will give you shade on the day where the sun is as close to the earth as possible. Where everyone's running around, alarmed, screaming, only caring about themselves. So just keep that in mind as we go through this halaqah, inshallah. There's a beautiful hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says that verily among the servants of Allah are people who are not prophets and they're not martyrs, but the prophets and the martyrs will admire them on the Day of Judgment. The prophets and the martyrs will admire this group of people on the Day of Judgment. And so the companions asked, they said, who are these people, Ya Rasulullah? And the Prophet ﷺ said, these are the people who love each other for the sake of Allah. These are the people who love each other for the sake of Allah, despite having shared no family relations, having, the relationship's not based on wealth even. By Allah, there will be light upon their faces and they will be upon light. SubhanAllah, when I first read that, I was like, no way. The prophets and the martyrs are going to admire the people who loved each other for the sake of Allah on the Day of Judgment. The prophets and the martyrs. This is authentic, sahih hadith. So it just tells you, it just tells you the enormity of this. Because we think about, okay, having love for someone, but to love someone for the sake of Allah will be the reason for your comfort on the Day of Judgment, and it will be a reason why the prophets and the martyrs themselves admire you on the Day of Judgment. So what that brings us to is understanding that love is an act of worship. Love is an act of worship. Loving is an act of worship, right? The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is a hadith reported by Abu Hurairah. He said that verily Allah will say on a day of judgment, where are those who love each other for my sake? And today I will shelter them in my shade on a day where there is no shade except mine. And there are various hadiths just like this one, reported by numerous companions. Just like this, all about loving each other for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, before we get into love for the sake of Allah, I think everyone knows there's different ways that people love each other, right? There's transactional love. People do something for you and you love them because of it. And that's like obviously the weakest form of love. Because it's temporary, it doesn't last. The minute that person stops being useful for you, that's it. That's enough. Right? There's love that you have naturally for your family members, the people you grew up with, the people that you've been around all your life. That's natural love. That's love that's kind of there. Right? There's love because of sacrifice, love because of the sacrifices people make for you and the sacrifices you make for them. So it's better than transactional, but there's still something stronger than that, right? Love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is on a different level. It's on a different level. It's on a level to which that you don't even have to have a personal attachment with that person. But because you love them for the sake of Allah, it's stronger than any other type of love. So, to put this in perspective, Abu Talib, who is the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, who passed away not as a Muslim, but was beloved to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ yearned for him to accept Islam. The Prophet ﷺ really wanted him to accept Islam so he could love him beyond this life. He wanted to love him in a life that's not like this one, in the hereafter. Right? And so the Prophet ﷺ was begging him to accept Islam on his deathbed. You know? And Abu Talib says, no, I'm going to die upon the religion of my ancestors. So that love that the Prophet ﷺ had, which was real, it was deep, it ended there. Because then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees the verse that it's not for you to guide, it's Allah who guides. Right? So that love that the Prophet ﷺ had was a genuine love, but it's not love for the sake of Allah. Because that love did not last beyond this world. Love for the sake of Allah goes beyond this world. Love for the sake of Allah goes to the hereafter. Right? Love for the sake of Allah is you helping someone or you supporting someone on their journey to Allah. So what does it mean to love for Allah's sake? One, sometimes you're just, and I think when you love someone for the sake of Allah, you're drawn to them because of their love for Allah, right? So you're seeking nothing from someone. Someone that you love for the sake of Allah, you're seeking nothing from them. You reach out to someone, you want to spend time with someone, you want to be around someone, and there's no benefit they can bring you. There's no incentive behind you doing this. This can even be an inconvenience for you, but you do it because you love them. You're seeking something from Allah, not from them, right? If you see someone struggling, you feel their struggle, right? If you see someone in pain, you feel their pain. That's love for the sake of Allah, and I think the best demonstration of that is the love that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq had for the Prophet ﷺ. And if you haven't studied the life of Abu Bakr, or if you haven't looked into the life of Abu Bakr, I feel like that's a halaqah in and of itself. Just who he was, what he accomplished in his life, and all the stories about him. He's easily my favorite companion. So I would definitely recommend to look into his life. But his love for the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was so deep. It was beyond this world. Abu Bakr was not the strongest, but he would fight on the behalf of the Prophet ﷺ at any point. He was one of the earliest to accept Islam. And so him fighting on behalf of the Prophet ﷺ when it was literally just him was just like proof. He was like a ride or die. You know what I mean? When the Prophet asked him to accompany him to Medina, right? So they're setting off on this dangerous journey. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq says, yes to this journey. And then he says, I get to be your companion, Ya Rasulullah. He's honored to go on this dangerous journey because he's going to be going with the Prophet ﷺ. When they stopped on that journey and they're both starving and they're both so thirsty and they're in need of some water or something, the Prophet ﷺ began to drink milk. He got it from on the way. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq says, when he saw the Prophet ﷺ drinking milk, he said, my beloved one drank and I became full. That's love for the sake of Allah. Where someone else's happiness fulfills your own, like takes away your sadness. In the cave, right? A lot of you know the story. When the Prophet ﷺ was resting, and the scorpion stings Abu Bakr, and he begins to cry. Tears begin to flow because of that sting. But he doesn't want to wake up the Prophet ﷺ, so he just stays quiet and just endures that pain because he just doesn't want to wake up the Prophet ﷺ. And one last thing about Abu Bakr before we move forward. His father accepted Islam way later in life. So this is after the Prophet ﷺ had died. His father accepted Islam. And so Abu Bakr's father was very old, and Abu Bakr saw his father accept Islam, and he began to cry. He began to cry profusely. And they asked him, what's wrong? Why are you crying like this? Because it wasn't tears of happiness. It was more just like sad tears. And so Abu Bakr says, I just can't help but think about the Prophet ﷺ and how badly he wanted his uncle Abu Talib to become Muslim. And I wish that he got to experience something like that. It got to experience a moment like this. That's love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, these are all such great examples of love for the sake of Allah. And then if we go into other examples of loving for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's, going out of your way for a person without making them feel like they're burdening you, right? Doing things for that person without expecting anything in return. There is a hadith narrated by Ali ibn Abi Talib where he says, the Prophet ﷺ said that if a Muslim visits a sick Muslim, someone who's sick, the angels, 70,000 angels will bless him when he goes. If he goes in the morning until the evening time, and then 70,000 will bless him in the evening time until the morning. And he will reap the fruits of paradise. Because there's no ulterior motive in doing any of these things. You're doing this out of the kindness of your heart. You're not doing this because you think, oh, this is going to help me, whatever, materialistic reason it's going to help me. There's no transaction there. This is you doing it because you seek Allah's pleasure. And it's easy to say that we seek Allah's pleasure. Like, it's easy to tell someone, I love you for the sake of Allah. But what does that actually come down to? What does that actually boil down to? If they became an inconvenience in your life, are you still going to do those things for them? Right? If they became, if it's not convenient for you in those moments, if it's a burden for you in those moments, are you still going to do those things that you claim to love them for the sake of Allah for? Another way to know whether you love someone for the sake of Allah is if you remember them in your tahajjud, if you remember them in those moments where it's literally just you and Allah. If you're making dua one day and you're like, Ya Allah, please grant this person happiness, please grant this person goodness. You remember a situation that they're in and you make dua for them instantly. Because you're not going to turn around the next day and be like, hey, I made dua for you yesterday. Like, no one's going to do that. That's between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So you're gonna keep that between you and Allah. You're not seeking anything except Allah's favor and when you love someone for the sake of Allah. You're not seeking anything else. They could just completely forget about you, but you love them for the sake of Allah because you're only seeking Allah. There's a famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. It's an Imam Nawawi's Sahih hadith. Everyone, I'm sure, has heard of it. It's none of you has faith until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. None of you has faith until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. Imam Ahmed commentates on this. Imam Ahmed, rahimahullah, he says, a slave will not reach the reality of faith until he loves for people which he wants for himself of good. So part of loving each other for the sake of Allah is loving for each other what we love for ourselves. In essence, you cannot claim to love each other for the sake of Allah if you don't love for them what you would love for yourself. Like this goes hand in hand. The Prophet ﷺ said to Abu Dhar, who is one of the companions, he said, "Oh Abu Dhar, I see that you're weak, and I love you for what I love for myself. I love for you what I love for myself." He says, so never take command over two people and never administer the property of an orphan. Because the Prophet ﷺ is giving him nasiha here. The Prophet ﷺ is giving him advice. He's saying you're weak in the sense of like you shouldn't have that authority, and don't take it because it's going to hurt you and hurt your akhirah. It's going to hurt your hereafter. You're not going to benefit from it. And this is love for the sake of Allah. He's looking out for him in a way that's beyond this earth, beyond this what we have here. Will it hurt his maybe finances, incentives, whatever the case is? But it's better for his hereafter, right? And as I looked into this topic about loving for others what you love for yourself, there's a few more things that I really had to read over a few times because of how profound they were. Ibn Abbas, radiallahu anhu, who's one of the greatest companions, he says, I passed by an ayah in the Quran, and I would love that everyone should know about this, what I know. Like, there's no gatekeeping there, right? Like, he was like, I want everyone to see the same wisdoms that I see in the Quran. This is loving for others what you love for yourself. Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, he says, I wish that everyone know the sciences that I know, and that they would never give me any credit for it. SubhanAllah, that's deep. He says he's one of the greatest imams ever, and he says, I wish that everyone had this knowledge I have, and I wish that they wouldn't give me any credit for it. He seeks nothing from anybody. It's solely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he's doing it for. Right? And that's a hard place to get to, especially when we have responsibilities. It's hard to say, I'm only going to do this for the sake of Allah. And I'm reminded, again, I already talked about Abu Bakr a whole lot, but I'll keep going. Abu Bakr Siddiq, Omar first came and he gave half his wealth. And the Prophet says, what did you leave for your family? Omar says, I left the other half. Logically, that makes sense. Abu Bakr comes and he gives all of his wealth, everything that he had. And the Prophet says, what did you leave for your family? Abu Bakr says, I left for them Allah and His Messenger. That's loving, that's just love on a whole different level. That's like seeking only Allah. And that's like the pinnacle of just getting to that point of loving for the sake of Allah. There was another righteous predecessor that said when he wanted to break his fast, he would ask one of his brothers to come to bring him water so that they get the reward, just like he would. So this is loving for others what you would love for yourself. And by extension, that goes to, loving each other for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in loving each other for the sake of Allah, we have to know that we must understand that love for Allah comes first before you can ever love someone for the sake of Allah. You can't have love for someone else for the sake of Allah if you don't love Allah in the first place, right? But you have to establish that relationship first. That's the key. So love, and to be totally frank, love without Allah will perish. Love without Allah will perish. It will not last, and it'll be destroyed, honestly. Aslam reported that Umar ibn Khattab said, radiyallahu anh, he said, let not your love be infatuation, and let not your hatred be destruction. A very popular quote of Umar. Let not your love be infatuation, and let not your hate be destruction. Meaning what? You have to find a balance when you love someone. Because, when you love someone, he says, when you love someone, you become infatuated like a child. And when you hate someone, you just seek the destruction, right? So finding that balance, and that balance is loving for the sake of Allah, which means that you can literally not know someone or not be close to somebody, but you can love them for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can have not spoken to someone for a very long time, but you can still love them for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because that's just a love that's deeper than anything else. So we must ground ourselves on love for the sake of Allah, and we must know how to love our Lord. Anas ibn Malik, he reported that a man came to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A man came to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he said, when will the hour be? I'm sure a lot of you have heard this hadith. Many of you have heard it. When will the hour be? The man says. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, he responds, what have you prepared for it? Meaning he wasn't trying to entertain the question of when will the hour be. It's more so what have you prepared for an hour when it does come? And the man says nothing, meaning he's only doing the bare minimum, meaning he's praying 5 times a day. He's doing the obligations, right? He's doing what's obligatory upon him, as a Muslim. He says, I prepare nothing else besides that, except that I love Allah and His Messenger. I've done nothing else except that I love Allah and His Messenger. And the Prophet ﷺ says, you will be with the ones you love. That, and then Anas, I'm sure that when I read that, it softens your heart. Anas ibn Malik says, we had never been so glad since we became Muslim. We've never been so glad as we were on hearing that statement. And so Anas goes on and he says, therefore I love the Prophet ﷺ, and I love Abu Bakr, and I love Umar, even though I'm not, my deeds are nowhere close to theirs. Even though I can't be anywhere close to them. They're just on a whole different level. I hope to be with them because of my love for them. This is Anas ibn Malik, one of the great companions, saying this. Right? So, loving Allah, loving the Prophet ﷺ is our gateway to paradise. Anas ibn Malik reports another hadith, and here's something that I recommend you all do. Keep a track when you do look at hadith or you do hear lectures of who's narrating the hadith. Anas ibn Malik narrates the hadith about love about this man that came and said, he loves Allah and His Messenger. And here's another hadith narrated by Anas ibn Malik where he's talking about love for the Prophet ﷺ. So there's ways to connect this. There's like ways to see who's narrating which hadith. It's very, very profound when you put it all together. So Anas ibn Malik, he reported the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, none of you have faith until I am more beloved to him than his child, his father, and all of the people. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is first. We love no one more than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? That's number one for us. And because of how much you love Allah, because of how much you love the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you should love Muslims. You should love your brothers and sisters. And you seek nothing from the people, and you truly love for the sake of Allah in doing so. And you will be amongst the shaded on the Day of Judgment when you do that the right way. Because you sought not what other people can do for you, but you showed love and respect and care and affection and kindness to your Muslim brothers and sisters, establishing that true brotherhood, establishing that true sisterhood, right? And sought nothing in return except the pleasure of your Lord. And when everyone is, bringing it back to the Day of Judgment, we mentioned the sun is as close to the earth as possible. People are sweating and melting and burning. You know, everyone is literally like not clothed and they're barefooted and they're running around frantic, fearful. Hell is brought to us by 4,900,000,000 angels. That shade is reserved for a select few people who fall into these categories. And of those categories is loving for the sake of Allah. And love, like we mentioned earlier, is an act of worship. Love, literally loving for the sake of Allah, is an act of worship. So that leaves us one final question, and it's how do we increase our love for Allah? And Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, he gives a whole list of things. I'm just going to go through like a few of them. The first that he mentions is reciting the Quran. Reciting the Quran, reflecting upon it, and understanding its intended meanings. When you connect with Allah's words, when you connect with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will notice just a change. I noticed this end of Ramadan. I decided I needed a Quran teacher. I got a teacher in Egypt. We do classes, and since then it's just been night and day. Just everything that had to do with like Quran, it's a whole nother level when I open the book. When I open the Mus'haf, it's like totally different. It just feels like before, comparing before and after, it's like, what was I doing before, honestly, right? And that's just after like what, 10 classes I've done so far? Like it hasn't been much, but it literally changes your life. Performing extra voluntary deeds and acts of worship in addition to the religious obligations. And I feel like diversifying your acts of worship is very important, right? Because I think we think worship and all we think is prayer. But worship in reality, with the right intent, I think I was here last time I gave a talk about intention. Like I talked about intention somewhere. I think it was here. And I mentioned that if you have the right intention, you can literally be worshiping your entire day. Right? Like if you intend, Ya Allah, I want to provide for my family. I'm making this intention to go to work today, even though like I'm sure everyone hates work, but like, if you make this intention that you want to provide for your family, you're getting rewarded for that, right? It's not just money that you're making there, right? So you intending to sleep because you want to wake up early, a half an hour before Fajr and pray extra. You're getting rewarded just for the intention, whether you wake up early or not, right? So those are things we can capitalize on. There was a righteous predecessor that says, I love to make an intention even for eating and sleeping, or eating and drinking. I love that every time I took a drink of water, I would get rewarded for it because I had the right intention for it. So that's just putting things in perspective. Our acts of worship, voluntary acts of worship, does not have to be just prayer. Voluntary acts of worship start with your intention. Patience is an act of worship. We mentioned already, love is an act of worship. These things can be acts of worship with the right intention, right? Thirdly, a way to increase in our love for Allah is studying the names and attributes of Allah. Studying the names and attributes of Allah. Knowing who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala truly is. Al-Hakim, right? Al-Wali, Ar-Rahman. These are names that we know. These are names that we hear all the time, but what do they actually mean? Where are they used in the Quran? How can we add this to our supplications, to our dua? I'm struggling with money. I'm struggling with finances, but Allah is Al-Razaq, right? Allah is the provider. Allah gives you rizq. So these are things that if we put into perspective, we can change our lives with, right? This next one that Ibn al-Qayyim mentions is really profound because it's probably the most vulnerable one I've seen. It says presenting one's broken heart before Allah. And just like the way that's phrased, presenting one's broken heart before Allah. Literally meeting Allah in such a humble, vulnerable state. Saying, Ya Allah, I'm dealing with so much. Ya Allah, like pretty much just bearing it all to your Lord. He's the only one that knows you, right? He's the only one that knows you perfectly. He knows you more than you know yourself. We think we know ourselves, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that truly knows, right? And in doing that, in having those low moments, those moments that we think are low, those moments that we think life is falling apart, those moments that we think things are, breaking apart, things are, why is this happening to me? In those moments, it's when we really love Allah more. We can get to that point of loving and connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more. And keeping company with righteous believers, whom He loves, and benefiting from the fruits of their words. And this ties back to, loving for the sake of Allah. There's a hadith Qudsi, which means this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah says, "He who is hostile to a friend of mine, I declare war against. My slave approaches me with nothing more beloved to me than what I have made obligatory upon him. And my slave keeps drawing nearer to me with voluntary works until I love him. And when I love him, I am his hearing with which he hears, his sight with which he sees, his hand with which he seizes, and his foot with which he walks. If he asks me, I will surely give it to him. And if he seeks refuge in me, I will surely protect him." This is Hadith Qudsi. This is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. That is so profound because when you think about it, when you reach that level of loving Allah, so much so that you think of Him before anything and everything you do. You literally protect your eyes, your hands, you protect your heart, you protect yourself. You keep yourself away from things He doesn't like and you go towards things that He does like. And when you surround yourself around people He loves and you stay away from the people he wouldn't love in the sense of you being around, you will find your life change. And the reality of loving someone for the sake of Allah, it matters not you or the other person. It matters not how much effort you put in or how much effort the other person puts in. It's about how much in that relationship, in that friendship, in that connection, how much you both choose to love Allah. And when you both love Allah and when you both have Allah's love, you will find everything and anything comes easy. So may Allah make it easy for us to love Him and love that which He loves. May Allah allow us to love each other for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. May Allah give us the best of this life, the best of the hereafter, and keep us safe from the punishment of the fire. May Allah give us a righteous death and make our grave spacious and make us among those who are shaded on the day of judgment where there is no shade. Where there's no shade besides His. May He reunite us with our loved ones in paradise. May He reunite us with our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in paradise. May we find peace amidst chaos, certainty amongst confusion, and ease amongst hardship. May we be amongst those who defend the truth, amongst those who combat injustice, amongst those who alleviate the pain of all the Muslims suffering in the world, including our brothers and sisters in Gaza. Jazakallah khair for having me. Happy to take questions if we're doing Q&A. Otherwise, Jazakallah khair. You don't have to ask a question. Yeah.
In terms of loving other people for the sake of Allah, I think what I think that part of me has considered that also selfish because I'm doing it with my outcome in mind, my outcome in mind. So that ultimately does feel selfish. It doesn't feel like I'm just doing it purely for the sake of Allah, because I'm doing it for the reward. So although the actions are good and the intentions are true, I feel like I feel like there's a different level to loving others versus Allah, and I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I think that's a fair concern. It's interesting because if you also do it with their akira in mind, I feel like that helps fix things a little bit, right? you're doing it with your akhirah in mind, but if you do it for that person's hereafter in mind as well, that helps kind of mitigate that issue. Because I think like you look at, for example, the examples of the companions, Abu Bakr Siddiq and the Prophet ﷺ. There's nothing the Prophet ﷺ, well, there's Abu Bakr Siddiq was of the 10 promised paradise already. So he was doing this strictly on this like whole nother level of just love for Allah. He wasn't even doing this to enter paradise. He was guaranteed paradise as it is, right? Like you knew Abu Bakr Siddiq was going to paradise regardless. But he was doing this strictly out of a love for Islam, a love for Allah, a love for the Prophet ﷺ. So I think that's a very interesting point. I think like that selfishness, I think, can also be deception of the shaitan as well. It could be when you're doing something for Allah's sake, I think you want to leave as least amount of room for the shaitan to creep in as well. Especially like, and then that goes back to intentions as well, right? And there was a righteous predecessor, I'm forgetting the name now, but he says if you feel like your intentions are right, then they're probably not. Like if you're not constantly rechecking your intentions, if you're not constantly like thinking more about am I doing this for the right reason, then you're probably not doing it for the right reason. So that might be actually a good sign that you have that concern. Yeah.
I actually want to add to your answer. I think a really good way to think about it would be confusion as to what proper love would be. A lot of times, like us living in the West, we can take Western standards of what love is. Like you mentioned, people love each other because they're family. People love each other because of all these different types of relationships. I'd say that's even more selfish than just loving somebody for the sake of Allah. I think that the most genuine form of love would be love for the sake of Allah. I think because of where we've grown up in our upbringing, that we've just like lost that concept of what true genuine love is supposed to look like.
Because we're chasing this like doing something for that other person type of thing. Yeah, I definitely see that. Jazakallah khair. That's awesome. Yeah.
Like, can we turn the love we have for our friends that maybe we didn't think about it or it just happened? Can we turn that love and like renew our intentions and make it for the sake of Allah? So like basically reset that friendship, whether it's making dua for them, pushing them to the masjid. Like, can you do that?
Definitely. Yeah. I think that's like a great point as well, where even if things didn't start, things might have started with a different intention, whether it's transactional, maybe it's just because they were family members, maybe because they were just friends, people that you grew up with, etc. That can turn into love for the sake of Allah. When you can always renew your intention. You can always say, I love this person for the sake of Allah, so I'm going to, in secret, make dua for them, right? I'm going to wake up, pray tahajjud, and make dua for them. I'm going to encourage them to do, things that are Islamic. I'm going to encourage them to be in Islamic spaces. I'm going to try and make this something based around Islam. And, I think it's the same as repentance, even though it's not repenting, but you can always turn to Allah. The door is never closed. And that's the same with this stuff, something like this as well. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. No, it doesn't have to be expressed to them. It can just be, it could be something that you just intend. You like you could be, honestly, you could be giving charity, like sadaqah jariyah for somebody, and they have no idea, and they will see it on the day of judgment, just all this extra rewards and deeds, and they're going to be like, where did this come from? And it came from you, and they would never know until that point. So no, it doesn't have to be.
So like it's one-sided.
One-sided. Yeah.
Like you don't really express it, like you say, like I love this person for the sake of Allah, I'll make dua for them, I'll push them, I'll go to the masjid, but we've never had that discussion.
But I feel like the actions are the discussion, right? The actions go a lot deeper than words, right? So you doing those things is a proof of loving them for the sake of Allah, right? And I think that is exactly what falls under the category of being shahid on the day of judgment. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, let's say like you take the high road, like with someone that you dislike, would that fall under like the love for Allah? Like you could have gotten revenge, but you kind of take the high road to say.
That's a good point. I think if you turn that into, again, like making dua for them, which might be, I think, for most human beings hard for if you dislike somebody, but I think that is kind of like you're right, the high road is making dua for them, is maybe trying to amend that relationship, that friendship, right? Is trying to do things in secret for them. I think that falls under loving them for the sake of Allah. Yeah.
And I want to add one more thing. Like I heard from that topic, they said the love for Allah is kind of like one-sided. Would you say that's like an accurate description, or it could be that like that because you don't expect anything in return?
Yeah, I mean, I think I wouldn't say that it's one-sided as much as it's not transactional, right? Like you're not seeking something. You're not seeking something in return. You're seeking only Allah's favor, right? You're seeking only Allah's pleasure. You're seeking only what Allah gives you, not what anyone else can. So I wouldn't say it's one-sided. It's just it's to the right. It's in the right place, right? And I think the reason why it feels kind of foreign is because I think we're used to love that's not for the sake of Allah, especially in where we live and where we grew up. Everything was always based on something, right? There was always a reason to do something. I remember, I won't go into specifics here, but I remember overhearing a conversation about there was a Muslim guy at work. Let me not. Okay, you know what? I'm not going to go there. But essentially, the people were so surprised that he spent so much money on his mother. They were just like, "No way, you spent all that money on a gift for your mom." I mean, he was just like shell shocked. He was like, "What are you talking about? Like this is normal." And so like, I think we underestimate just how much people have become so love has become so transactional, right? In any relationship, it's just become just what can you do for me? Especially in this world where it's like selfish, individualistic, like everything's all about me, me, me. We kind of forgot what it means. And that's why loving for the sake of Allah might seem a little foreign, I think, which is crazy. But yeah. If that's it, Jazakallah khair. Really appreciate it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.